Picture a Tuesday. Not any Tuesday you would recognize. No calendar, no clock, no name for the day at all. But something is moving through the dark beyond the sky. Has been moving for millions of years, tracing an ancient, patient arc through the solar system. A rock, a mountain of rock and metal, 10 to 15 kilometers wide, dark as coal, hurtling at roughly 20 kilometers per second, faster than any bullet ever made, faster than sound by a factor of 60. On the planet below, a Tyrannosaurus rex is finishing a meal, somewhere in what will one day be called Montana. Hadrosaurs are grazing in shallow water near a coastline that no longer exists. Small, warm, furred creatures are tucked into burrows beneath roots, as they always are, as they have always been, hiding, always hiding, waiting for a world that has not yet decided to let them in. The rock arrives, the Tuesday ends. 66 million years ago, something that had no business surviving, survived, and something that had ruled the Earth for over 160 million years, a dynasty longer than anything mammals have ever managed, was erased in the time it takes a forest to burn. We call them extinct. We say that word quickly, the way you say it about a species you never knew, a thing from the past, a curiosity behind glass in a museum. But there is something worth slowing down for here. Something that should sit with you before you sleep tonight. The dinosaurs were not failing. They were not winding down, not running out of ideas, not on their way out. The most current paleontological evidence strongly suggests they were thriving. Diverse, widespread, occupying every continent on Earth, from the Arctic to Antarctica, from coastlines to high plateaus. They were, by any biological measure, a success. And then a rock arrived from space at precisely the wrong moment. This documentary is not about what the dinosaurs were. It is about what the world looks like today if that rock arrives 30 minutes later. If it grazes the atmosphere, skips off into the dark, and tumbles harmlessly back into the outer solar system. It is about what happens to the planet in the 66 million years that follow. It is about the mammals who stay small and frightened in their burrows. It is about whether a mind like yours, reading, thinking, wondering, would exist at all. And perhaps most importantly, it is about what all of this tells us about the nature of intelligence, the loneliness of consciousness, and whether we were ever supposed to be here. Before we ask what might have been, we need to understand exactly what was. The world of 66 million years ago was not the world you know. The continents were still moving toward their current positions, recognizable, but wrong, like a map drawn by someone who has only heard a description of the real thing. North America was partially submerged beneath a vast inland sea called the Western Interior Seaway, which split the continent roughly in half from north to south. Sea levels were perhaps 170 meters higher than they are today. There were no polar ice caps. Forests grew at the poles, cold but living, lit by seasonal light. The climate was warm, significantly warmer than anything humans have lived through in our brief tenure on Earth. Average global temperatures were roughly 5 to 10 degrees Celsius higher than today's baseline. The air was thick with carbon dioxide, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 parts per million, compared to the 420 we have reached today through industrial effort and which we treat as a crisis. By late Cretaceous standards, our crisis would have been a mild afternoon. Tropical conditions extended to latitudes that are now temperate. A palm tree stood where London will one day be built. Lush vegetation pushed to within 1,000 kilometers of the poles. The oceans were warmer too. Surface water temperatures at the equator reached around 30 degrees Celsius year-round. Even at the poles, sea surface temperatures stayed above 10 degrees in winter. This heat drove an enormous, globally connected system of warm, wet, biologically productive oceanic circulation, supporting a marine ecosystem of staggering richness. Ammonites spiraling through open water, mosasaurs cutting silently through warm seas, plesiosaurs hunting fish in the shallows, marine turtles the size of compact cars resting on the surface. This was the world the dinosaurs had built for themselves, or rather, the world that had built them, and in which they were perfectly embedded. In this warm, wet, abundant world, dinosaurs held every major ecological role that mattered on land. They were the herbivores, They were the carnivores. They were the mid-sized omnivores. They were the apex predators and the scavengers and the browsers and the grazers. Every large terrestrial ecological niche on Earth for 160 million years had a dinosaur in it. Understanding this matters because it is the foundation on which the counterfactual rests. The large herbivores of the Late Cretaceous, the animals that the entire terrestrial food web was built around, were the hadrosaurs and the ceratopsians. The hadrosaurs are frequently presented as simple, slow, defenseless animals, the proverbial prey of everything with teeth and speed. This is wrong, and the wrongness matters. These were extraordinarily successful animals, among the most numerous large vertebrates Earth has ever seen. They moved in vast herds. Evidence of this comes from bone beds in Alberta, in Montana, in China, in locations across the northern hemisphere, where hundreds or thousands of individuals died together in ancient floods, and their bones were buried in dense, layered aggregations. Each bone bed is a snapshot of a social group whose scale rivals any herding animal alive today. They communicated through elaborate cranial crests, hollow, resonating chambers that channeled air and produced deep, resonant calls that varied between species and almost certainly between individuals of the same species. We know this because the internal structure of those crests has been studied, modelled, and in some cases reconstructed into functional sound producers by paleontologists who specialise in exactly this question. When a hadrosaur like Parasaurolophus called across a floodplain, it produced a sound that travelled long distances, deep, complex, modulated. A herd of Parasaurolophus calling together would have been audible for kilometres. These were animals that maintained social contact through voice, across distance, in ways that required a degree of social awareness beyond simple reactive communication. Their teeth were extraordinary biological structures that have no close equivalent in any living animal. Rather than a single tooth in each socket, hadrosaurs had batteries, vertical columns of teeth, stacked one behind the other, so that as each tooth wore down and fell away, a fresh one rose to replace it from below. Hundreds of teeth in active use at any given time, arranged in a grinding surface of remarkable efficiency. This gave hadrosaurs the ability to process enormous quantities of the toughest plant material available, coarse vegetation, bark, dense fibrous stems, at a metabolic rate that required almost constant feeding and extensive ranging to maintain. The ceratopsians were equally impressive, and even more frequently misunderstood. Triceratops is the famous one, with its 3 horns and wide frill. But the ceratopsian family was broad and diverse by the end of the Cretaceous. Different horns, different frill shapes and sizes, different colouring patterns preserved in some fossil skin impressions, different ranges and habitats. Evidence suggests they formed herds and engaged in complex social behaviour centred on visual display and species recognition. The elaborate horns and frills almost certainly functioned, at least partly, in sexual selection and social signalling, not merely in defence. The metabolic cost of growing them suggests they conferred significant reproductive advantage. The ankylosaurs, the armoured dinosaurs, are perhaps the least appreciated of the late Cretaceous herbivores. 2 major families, the ankylosaurids, with their massive tail clubs of fused bone that could shatter the leg of a tyrannosaur, and the nodosaurids, more lightly built but heavily armoured on the back and flanks. Recent biomechanical analysis has shown that the 2 families partitioned their dietary niches by feeding height and vegetation type, an ecological sophistication that was maintained across tens of millions of years of coexistence, and which points to a more complex community structure than is often assumed. The pachycephalosaurs, with their thick dome-shaped skulls packed with solid bone, were the most enigmatic. The obvious interpretation was head-butting, like bighorn sheep. More careful biomechanical work has challenged this, suggesting the domes may have been used in flank contact rather than direct head-on impacts. Whatever the specific behaviour, the elaboration of the structure across many species points to complex social dynamics involving physical competition, individual recognition, and the kind of fine-grained behavioural assessment that requires more sophisticated nervous systems than simple stimulus response animals would need. And then there were the theropods, the 2-legged meat-eaters, in all their astonishing variety. At the large end, the tyrannosaurs. Tyrannosaurus rex was a late arrival in its own family, appearing only in the final 2 to 3 million years of the Cretaceous. possibly replacing an earlier tyrannosaur fauna it outcompeted. It was enormous, perhaps 8 to 12 tons, 12 to 13 meters long, and equipped with a skull so massive it served almost as a weapon in itself. The jaw force of Tyrannosaurus rex has been calculated at over 35,000 newtons, more than any other land animal ever measured. It bit through the bones of its prey, extracting calorie-dense marrow. Whether it was primarily a predator, an opportunistic scavenger, or both, remains genuinely debated. But the biology speaks to an animal that was highly specialized, ecologically central, and metabolically demanding in its requirements. At the medium end, the ornithomimosaurs, long-legged, ostrich-like runners that probably occupied an ecological role similar to large, fast-moving omnivores in modern ecosystems. The oviraptorosaurs, crested, beaked, and broadly omnivorous, occupying a diverse range of body sizes and dietary niches. The allosaurid and carcharodontosaurid lineages, now gone by the Late Cretaceous, but having shaped the ecosystem for the preceding tens of millions of years. And at the small end, the Paravians, the Dromaeosaurs, the Troodontids, the bird-like Microraptors, a diverse complex of small to medium-sized feathered theropods representing the most cognitively complex animals in the non-avian dinosaur world, and the lineage from which birds had already emerged before the extinction even occurred. These small, feathered theropods are where the counterfactual becomes most interesting and most difficult to trace. They are where the question of intelligence, of what intelligence was possible in the world that was lost, becomes most urgent. Troodon formosus. Let us spend some time here, because Troodon sits at the center of everything we are about to explore. The name means wounding tooth, which is rather prosaic for what some paleontologists have decided may be the most cognitively complex non-avian dinosaur that ever lived. It was a modest animal by dinosaur standards, roughly 2 meters long, perhaps 50 kilograms in weight, bipedal, feathered, with a relatively small head compared to the tyrannosaurs, but equipped with forward-facing eyes that provided excellent stereoscopic vision. Its hands had partially mobile digits, giving it grasping capability. Its feet had a retractable sickle claw, the feature shared with the dromaeosaurs, which it likely used to pin prey or for climbing in forested terrain. None of this is what makes Troodon remarkable. What makes Troodon remarkable is its brain. When paleontologist Dale Russell first reconstructed Troodon's skull and estimated the volume of its endocast, the space inside the brain case that the brain actually occupied, he found an encephalization quotient far above anything expected for a dinosaur of its body mass. The encephalization quotient, or EQ, compares an animal's actual brain size to the brain size predicted for a mammal of equivalent body weight. An EQ of 1 means average mammal-level brain relative to body size. Human EQ is around 7, depending on the calculation method. Dogs sit around 1.2. Troodon's EQ, by Russell's calculation, placed it at the lower edge of the range normally occupied by birds and mammals, well above the reptile average, and far above any other non-avian dinosaur measured at the time. Later studies, using CT scanning, which provides more precise measurements of brain volume from the internal surface of the brain case, largely confirmed the core finding. Troodon had a brain that was, proportionally, in a different category from almost every other dinosaur. Its optic lobes were enlarged. This suggests enhanced visual processing, appropriate for an animal with forward-facing binocular eyes. Its cerebrum appeared more developed than would be typical for a reptile of equivalent size. Fossil evidence suggests Troodon was involved in some form of parental care of eggs, and possibly young, a behavioral complexity associated with larger brains in other lineages. These features, taken together, point to an animal capable of more sophisticated sensory integration and more complex behavioral responses than its contemporaries. What can we say, carefully, about how smart Troodon was? Modern comparative work on bird cognition, and birds, let us be absolutely clear, are dinosaurs. Descended from small theropods closely related to the troodontid lineage, suggests that the avian brain, while architecturally different from the mammalian brain, achieves comparable cognitive outputs through different structural means. Corvids, crows, ravens, jays demonstrate causal reasoning, future planning, social cognition, including apparent theory of mind, tool manufacture, and complex vocal communication. Parrots demonstrate symbolic category understanding, numerical discrimination, and flexible communication with human interlocutors that goes beyond simple conditioning. African grey parrots in experimental settings have demonstrated understanding of abstract concepts, sameness, difference, quantity, colour, that was long believed uniquely mammalian. Troodon was not a crow. It was not a parrot. It was a late Cretaceous animal with neural architecture that predates the full development of avian cognitive sophistication. But it occupied the same architectural lineage. The neural structures that would eventually produce corvid and parrot intelligence were present in their ancestral form in animals like Troodon. The question for the counterfactual is not whether those structures existed, they did, but how much further selection pressure could have developed them over 66 million more years of evolution. This is where I want to be honest about the limits of what paleontology can tell us. We have fossil skulls, we have endocasts, we have body plans. We do not have behaviour preserved directly, except in the trace fossils of footprints and nesting sites. We are extrapolating from anatomy to cognition, which is always an uncertain business even for living animals whose behaviour we can directly observe. What I can say with reasonable confidence is this. Troodon represented the upper limit of cognitive development in the non-avian dinosaur world at the end of the Cretaceous. And the trend in that direction, toward larger relative brain size, had been slowly building throughout the Mesozoic. The extinction cut that trend short. The question the counterfactual asks is, given 66 million more years, where does it go? Now let us build the scenario carefully, because it deserves that care. The Chicxulub impactor struck the northwestern Yucatán peninsula in what was then a shallow tropical sea. The water depth at the impact site was approximately 100 metres, shallow continental shelf, not deep ocean. The rock beneath was a thick sequence of sulfur-bearing evaporite formations, laid down in ancient shallow marine environments over many millions of years. When the impactor vaporized, which happened in a fraction of a second, it vaporized those evaporites as well, injecting a massive quantity of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. Recent research has estimated approximately 67 billion tons of sulfur released, a number that, even revised downward from earlier estimates, is staggering. Combined with the enormous quantity of fine silicate dust from pulverized rock, and the carbon soot from the global wildfires ignited by re-entering ejecta heating the atmosphere, this material formed a stratospheric veil that blocked sunlight across the entire planet. Computer models suggest the amount of sunlight reaching Earth's surface was reduced by approximately 20% at first, and much more severely in the immediate aftermath. The temperature drop in continental interiors was perhaps 25 degrees Celsius. In the terms we use today, an impact winter, analogous to what would follow a large-scale nuclear exchange. Research by scientists including Joanna Morgan at Imperial College London has confirmed that the specific sulfur-rich geology of the Yucatán was critical to the severity of the outcome. If the impactor had struck at the same time, but in deeper water, the deep Pacific for instance, the sulfur content of the impacted rock would have been far lower, and the global darkness far less severe. The impact itself would still have been catastrophic locally, producing tsunamis, earthquakes, and regional destruction of extraordinary scale. But the global photosynthesis shutdown that killed the large animals might not have occurred, or it might have lasted weeks rather than years, long enough to cause significant stress, not long enough to permanently collapse the food chains that large animals depended on. The Earth rotates. 30 minutes of rotation shifts the impact site by several hundred kilometers. A slight difference in orbital trajectory, a gravitational nudge from Jupiter, from Saturn, from the inner planets, changes the path of the impactor by small but decisive amounts, millions of years before the impact itself. A rock moving at 20 kilometers per second on an approach trajectory that crosses Earth's orbit, the margins of intersection are uncomfortably small. In our timeline, it hit. In a slightly different configuration of the solar system's gravitational landscape, it misses, or it grazes the atmosphere and skips out, or it strikes deep water. The asteroid misses, or it strikes a target that cannot cause the winter. Either way, the darkness does not descend. The plants survive. The food chain holds, and the small, furred things remain in their burrows, exactly where they have always been. The first 10 million years of the counterfactual are, from the perspective of a casual observer, almost indistinguishable from the Late Cretaceous itself. The dinosaur fauna continues. Individual species turn over. Speciation and extinction are constant processes operating at the level of individual populations below the threshold of catastrophe. But the broad ecological structure holds. The major groups persist. The hadrosaur herds continue to cross the floodplains. The ceratopsian groups continue their social rituals. The tyrannosaurs continue to anchor the top of the food chain in the northern continents. But changes are accumulating. The climate continues the cooling trend already underway at the end of the Cretaceous. Carbon dioxide levels continue to fall. The inland sea that bisected North America drains further as sea levels gradually lower. The continents continue their slow separations and collisions, and with each increment of change, the selection pressures on the dinosaur fauna shift incrementally. The largest sauropods, the great, long-necked titans of the southern continents, face increasing pressure as tropical forests contract at the margins. Some lineages follow their forest habitat toward the equator, maintaining in tropical refugia while populations at higher latitudes thin and eventually disappear. Others adapt, smaller body size, allowing more efficient thermoregulation. Denser integument, as selection pressure favors insulating structures. More diverse diets, incorporating the expanding range of flowering plant foods. The hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, already cold adapted from their polar forest heritage, fare better. They expand into the cooling world rather than retreating from it. Northern hadrosaur lineages develop denser, more elaborate plumage. Feathers already present in some theropod relatives are selected for insulation in the cooling climate. This is not a dramatic transformation on any human timescale. It is one incremental generation at a time, over millions of years. But the accumulation of those increments produces, eventually, animals that would not be recognizable as Cretaceous hadrosaurs. The carnivores reorganize around the changing prey base. Tyrannosaur lineages, under pressure from prey animals that are becoming faster and more dispersed as the world cools and opens, face a fork, grow smaller and faster, optimizing for pursuit, or maintain large size but become more energy efficient, more opportunistic. Evidence from our own world suggests that both strategies can succeed. Compare the cheetah and the lion, or the wolf and the bear. The counterfactual tyrannosaur world likely bifurcates similarly. And through all of this, the small feathered theropods continue their own evolution, largely below the notice of the large animals that dominate the ecological stage. The troodontids, the dromaeosaurs, the emerging lineages of sophisticated small hunters, they continue to probe the cognitive frontier of what the dinosaur lineage can achieve. Not dramatically, not quickly, but persistently. 20 million years into the counterfactual. 30. The world is now noticeably different from the late Cretaceous, though still recognizably dinosaurian. The flowering plants have completed their takeover of terrestrial plant communities. In our Cenozoic, this happened without dinosaurs to co-evolve with them in a mammalian context. In the counterfactual, the relationship between angiosperms and the dinosaur fauna evolves along its own path. Some dinosaur lineages become increasingly frugivorous. The fruits of flowering plants are calorie-dense, abundant, and reliably available in tropical and subtropical environments. Small arboreal theropods that were already exploring tree foraging niches in the late Cretaceous now have 66 million years of fruit availability as a selective pressure. The cognitive demands of fruit foraging are real and well documented in our world's primates. A fruit-eating animal navigating a complex forest must track the locations of potentially hundreds of individual fruit trees, know their fruiting seasons, assess fruit quality rapidly, compete with rivals for access, and integrate this information into foraging routes that maximize caloric return. These demands select for spatial memory, temporal reasoning, flexible behavioral response, and, in social species, communication about resource locations. The same demands that pushed primate brains towards greater complexity would exert similar pressure on any arboreal frugivorous dinosaur lineage. Is this pressure sufficient to drive rapid cognitive expansion in the counterfactual theropod lineage? Over 30 or 40 million years, with consistent selection for cognitive flexibility in fruit-exploiting arboreal small theropods? My honest assessment is yes. It is sufficient to produce notable cognitive expansion. Not human-equivalent intelligence in 30 million years, but measurable, significant movement along the cognitive continuum. There is also a different pressure worth naming: prey intelligence. In any ecosystem where predator and prey co-evolve, each innovation by the predator is matched by a counter-adaptation from the prey. Prey that can predict predator behavior survive better. Predators that can model prey behavior succeed better. This creates an arms race of cognitive sophistication, not just physical speed and strength, but behavioral flexibility, learning, and in social species, the ability to transmit information about predator tactics to other individuals. Over millions of years, this arms race can drive significant brain expansion in both the predators and the prey. In the counterfactual world, the arms race between the derived tyrannosaur lineages and the hadrosaur or ceratopsian lineages they hunt continues uninterrupted. Every generation, smarter prey survive better, and smarter predators feed better. The cumulative effect, over tens of millions of years, would be a progressive increase in behavioral sophistication on both sides. Not approaching human cognition in either lineage, because neither lineage has the specific combination of body plan features that make our kind of intelligence possible, but producing richer, more complex behavioral repertoires than anything that existed in the Late Cretaceous. The grasslands appear. In our world, grass, as a dominant vegetation type, covering vast areas of the continental interiors, emerged during the Oligocene and expanded dramatically in the Miocene, roughly 20 to 10 million years ago. This expansion was driven by a combination of global cooling, increased aridity in continental interiors, and the specific biology of grass itself, which is tolerant of grazing pressure in ways that forest vegetation is not. The spread of grasslands triggered a revolution in animal life in our world. The radiation of fast-running, high-crowned toothed ungulate grazers, and the parallel radiation of the open country predators that hunted them. In the counterfactual, grass still appears. Grass is a plant lineage whose evolution and spread are driven by climate, soil chemistry, and fire, none of which are fundamentally changed by whether a particular asteroid hit a particular spot 66 million years earlier. The grasslands of the counterfactual Oligocene equivalent appear on schedule, driven by the same planetary forces. What changes is who moves in. In our world, horses and cattle and antelope and wildebeest colonized the grasslands, evolving high-crowned teeth to handle abrasive grass, long legs for sustained running on open terrain, and complex herd behavior as defense against predators in an environment with limited cover. In the counterfactual, the mammals are still small, still constrained by the presence of large dinosaurians in every major herbivore niche. The grassland grazer role, when it opens, is taken instead by derived hadrosaur or ceratopsian lineages. Picture the Serengeti, but dinosaurian. Vast herds of derived hadrosaurs, smaller than their Cretaceous ancestors and adapted for open terrain. More efficient runners on longer legs, with modified tooth batteries capable of handling abrasive grass, with even more elaborate communication systems evolved over 30 or 40 million additional years of social selection. Their calls fill the open air. Their migrations cover thousands of kilometers in seasonal rhythms. Their social structures are complex enough that describing them in purely instinctive terms would be inadequate, and hunting them. Derived tyrannosaur descendants, perhaps armless, the forelimbs already reduced to near uselessness in our Tyrannosaurus rex and its immediate relatives, and continuing to reduce under selection in a lineage where they serve no function and carry metabolic cost. Armless, bipedal, fast, with perhaps enhanced olfactory systems or color vision for tracking in open grass. Something between a Komodo dragon and a wolf, scaled to tyrannosaur mass, evolved over millions of additional years in a world that has no lions, no wolves, no large cursorial predators of any mammalian design. The ecological logic is consistent and internally coherent. The counterfactual world is not a fantasy. It is the natural extension of evolutionary dynamics that were already operating in the Late Cretaceous, extended through additional geological time under additional climatic and ecological pressures. 50 million years into the counterfactual, 60. Now we approach the equivalent of our present day, The continents are in approximately their current positions. Plate tectonics cares nothing for which asteroid hit which deposit 66 million years ago. The physics of plate motion are entirely independent of which species dominate the land surface. The Himalayas have risen. The Atlantic has continued to widen. Australia has moved north. Antarctica has developed its ice cap, as global cooling has continued through both timelines. The climate oscillates through ice ages, Milankovitch cycles, the rhythmic wobbles of Earth's orbit, and axial tilt drive glacial periods every 100,000 years or so. The ice ages would have occurred in the counterfactual, just as they occurred in our timeline, and they represent, as they did in our world, an extraordinary selection pressure for behavioral flexibility, dietary adaptability, and cognitive sophistication. The ice ages changed human intelligence profoundly. The rapid oscillations between glacial and interglacial conditions, between tundra and forest, between drought and flood, selected strongly for behavioral plasticity. The ability to change behavior in response to changing conditions faster than genetic evolution could track. Brains that could learn new strategies, communicate new information, and maintain social networks that distributed risk and knowledge were survival advantages of the highest order. Our large brains are, in significant part, an Ice Age product. In the counterfactual, the Ice Ages drive the same kind of selection on the theropod lineages that had been moving in the direction of cognitive complexity. The small arboreal fruit eaters face a particularly sharp test. During glacial maxima, fruit resources collapse as tropical forests contract. Animals with the behavioral flexibility to expand their diet, remember alternative food sources, and communicate resource information within social groups survive better. The Ice Age is a cognitive sieve passed repeatedly over tens of millions of years that enriches the cognitive capacity of any lineage that can respond behaviorally rather than only genetically. By the equivalent of our present day, the counterfactual world almost certainly contains one or more lineages of genuinely sophisticated cognitive complexity in the theropod family tree. Not human equivalent intelligence. I want to be clear and honest about this assessment because I think it matters. The specific neural and physical architecture that produced our form of intelligence, the combination of large cortex, precise grasping hands, bipedal locomotion that freed those hands for manipulation, an extended childhood for learning, and a particular kind of social structure that rewarded information sharing, is so specific to our lineage that reproducing it through a completely different evolutionary pathway seems genuinely improbable in any fixed timescale. But something impressive, something that would astonish us if we could see it, perhaps something in the range of what we see in chimpanzees in our world. Animals that use tools, that learn culturally within their social groups, that have complex social relationships and apparent theory of mind, that communicate with some degree of intentionality about the external world, but operating in a dinosaurian body with dinosaurian neural architecture in an ecological context that has had 66 million years to develop its own particular version of cognitive demand. Whether these animals would seem to us on observation to be intelligent in a recognizable sense, whether we would see in their behavior the kinds of patterns that trigger our recognition of something like a mind, depends on questions about their specific social structures, their communication systems, their tool use, if any, their treatment of dead conspecifics, their responses to novel problems that we cannot answer from paleontology alone. What we can say is that the evolutionary pressures that produce intelligence were present and operating in the counterfactual world. Time was available. The biological substrate, the theropod neural lineage, was capable of expansion. The ecological demands, fruit finding, social competition, predator-prey arms races, Ice Age cognitive selection, were present and operating. The minds of that world would be real. They would be interesting. They would be utterly unlike us. Here is where the counterfactual becomes not just a thought experiment about dinosaurs, but something much larger. In our world, intelligence has evolved multiple times and in radically different lineages. This is one of the most remarkable and underappreciated facts in all of evolutionary biology. Corvids, crows, ravens, jays demonstrate cognitive abilities that rival primates in most experimental contexts. Tool manufacture and use, causal reasoning, future planning, social cognition, including apparent theory of mind, complex vocal communication. Corvids and primates last shared a common ancestor over 300 million years ago. Their intelligence evolved independently from different neural substrates under completely different ecological pressures. Elephants demonstrate sophisticated social cognition, apparent grief responses, self-recognition in mirrors, and complex spatial memory. Their lineage split from ours long before the modern primate brain architecture emerged. Cetaceans, whales, and dolphins possess neural complexity that by some measures rivals our own, organized in a completely alien architecture adapted to aquatic life. And then there is the octopus, a creature that diverged from the vertebrate lineage more than 500 million years ago, before the Cambrian explosion, before anything that had anything like a backbone existed, and independently evolved a distributed nervous system, sophisticated problem-solving, and camouflage behavior that requires continuous cognitive modeling of environment and self. Intelligence, then, is not unique. Evolution finds it repeatedly under sufficiently demanding conditions. The mechanisms are different in each case, different neural architectures, different developmental trajectories, different cognitive styles. But the functional outcome, the ability to respond to novel problems with flexible behavior, to learn from experience and share learning socially, to model the mental states of other individuals, appears multiple times in multiple lineages across enormously different evolutionary histories. This pattern has a name: convergent evolution, and it raises a question that sits at the heart of the counterfactual we have been exploring. Is intelligence convergent in the way that wings are convergent? A solution to a common problem that evolution finds independently in multiple contexts? Or is it contingent in the way that, say, the specific anatomy of the human hand is contingent? A particular solution that arose once, for reasons specific to one lineage, and that other lineages have not needed or been positioned to replicate? The evidence from our world suggests that intelligence itself, the general capacity for flexible, learning-based, socially transmitted behavior, is convergent. Evolution finds it in corvids and parrots, in primates, in elephants, in cetaceans, in octopuses. Given sufficient ecological demand over sufficient time, it appears reliably. But civilization, the recursive self-improvement of accumulated knowledge, the externalization of intelligence into durable media, the exponential amplification of cognitive output through language and writing and mathematics, this is something else. This has happened exactly once in Earth's history. Possibly exactly once in the observable universe, though we cannot know that. And its occurrence in our lineage depended on a very specific combination of factors that may not have been replicated if the dinosaurs had survived. Here is my honest position on this question. Stated as clearly as I can, I believe that in the counterfactual world, some theropod lineage would have eventually developed intelligence comparable to chimpanzees, or crows, or elephants. I am genuinely uncertain whether any lineage would have crossed the threshold into civilization building, science doing, record-keeping intelligence. The specific obstacles, hands versus wings, fire discovery, extended juvenile dependency, particular social structures that reward explicit knowledge sharing, are significant enough that I do not think it is the default outcome. And I think this distinction matters enormously. Consider what civilization actually requires, broken down to its components. First, a body that can manipulate objects with precision. Hands, in our case, with opposable thumb, mobile individual fingers, fine motor control. This allows tool manufacture, which allows the amplification of cognitive output into the physical world. Without precise manipulation, intelligence remains locked inside the skull. The ideas never become objects. The insights never become technologies. Second, control of fire. The importance of fire to human cognitive evolution is difficult to overstate. Cooking food increases caloric availability dramatically. Cooked starch and protein are more bioavailable than raw, and the shift to cooked food is associated with the expansion of brain size in our lineage, since brains are expensive metabolic organs requiring high-quality fuel. Fire also enables extended working hours past dark. Light for social time, for storytelling, for the transmission of knowledge in the extended social gatherings that warmth and safety create. Fire enables metallurgy, which enables the manufacturing of durable tools. Fire enables agriculture at scale, because stored cooked food survives longer than raw food. Third, language of sufficient complexity to carry abstract propositions. Not all animal communication is language. Most of it, even in highly intelligent species, is indexical. It refers to present, concrete situations. True language carries abstractions, refers to past and future and hypothetical states, can express propositions that have never been expressed before. This requires a specific kind of neural infrastructure for symbolic representation, and a vocal apparatus capable of producing the range of sounds needed to make that symbolism explicit and transmissible. Fourth, a social structure that rewards knowledge sharing. Intelligence in an individual is limited by what that individual can learn in a single lifetime, but in a social species where knowledge is shared freely, where one individual's innovation is available to all, the effective intelligence of the group is multiplied by every individual in it. This requires social structures that are not intensely competitive for information, that reward teaching and sharing rather than hoarding. Fifth, and perhaps most critical, writing, or some equivalent form of knowledge externalization. The ability to store knowledge outside of individual minds, in a medium that persists across generations, is what transforms intelligence from a property of individuals into a property of civilizations. Without writing, every generation must relearn from scratch. With writing, knowledge accumulates. Mathematics, science, law, history, all of these depend on the ability to transmit information to people who are not present, across time. Writing is how intelligence becomes exponential. Do the counterfactual intelligent theropods have all of these? Some are plausible. Theropods have hands, or at least forelimbs with mobile digits, potentially capable of manipulation. Language-like communication is plausible given the avian heritage of complex vocalization. Social structures that reward information sharing, this depends on the specifics of a lineage's ecology, which we cannot know. Fire is the critical uncertainty. Whether any animal independently discovers fire depends on a complex set of contingencies: proximity to natural fire sources, behavioral experimentation near fire, the specific cognitive architecture needed to understand fire as a manageable tool rather than simply a threat. In our lineage, this happened once, and the evidence of when it became controlled and intentional is itself debated. It is not guaranteed to happen in any other lineage, even intelligent ones. Writing is even more uncertain. It requires not just intelligence, but a specific kind of intelligence, one that can conceive of marks as representing sounds, and sounds as representing concepts, and concepts as being transmissible to minds that are not physically present. This is an extraordinarily abstract capacity, and its development in our lineage required tens of thousands of years of prior symbolic behavior: cave art, ornamental objects, ritual burial, musical instruments, before the step to writing became possible. My assessment, the counterfactual world, 66 million years after the asteroid's absence, contains sophisticated intelligent animals in at least one theropod lineage. These animals may have some form of tool use. They probably have complex vocal communication that serves social functions. They may have some rudimentary form of behavioral tradition transmitted across generations. But they almost certainly have not invented writing. And without writing, they have no science, no mathematics, no accumulated technology, no civilization in any sense we would recognize. They are, in other words, in a position analogous to what we might call the Upper Paleolithic of human history, perhaps 40,000 years ago, when anatomically modern humans existed, with large brains and complex behavior, but had not yet developed the agricultural and civilizational revolution that happened only 12,000 years ago. They might be stuck there indefinitely, without the specific confluence of ecological pressures, the particular crisis of the Younger Dryas cold period that may have forced early agricultural experimentation, for instance, that pushed our ancestors across the threshold. The silence of the counterfactual world is the most important fact about it. No radio signals propagating outward from Earth into the cosmos. No deliberate beams of information aimed at distant stars. No probe crossing the orbit of Saturn with a golden record of human greeting attached to its hull. No telescope arrays scanning the sky for the faint signatures of other minds. The minds of the counterfactual Earth, however sophisticated, however socially complex, however cognitively impressive by the standards of the Late Cretaceous, remain local. Their intelligence does not escape the planet. Their accumulated knowledge does not outlast the individuals who carry it, or at most, outlasts them by a few generations before being lost. Their civilization, if we can use that word, does not build. This thought connects directly to the Fermi Paradox, to that fundamental question about why a universe apparently capable of producing intelligence seems, from our vantage point, to be silent. One possible resolution: the counterfactual Earth is the typical case, not the exceptional one. Most planets with complex life, most worlds with evolving ecosystems, most biospheres where intelligence begins to emerge, remain at the stage of the counterfactual Earth, rich with sophisticated organisms and empty of the specific kind of civilization-building intelligence that produces radio signals and space probes. The threshold from intelligence to civilization, from mind to technology, is crossed only rarely, under conditions so specific that they may not obtain on most worlds, where the prerequisites are otherwise in place. If this is true, and we cannot know whether it is true, only that it is consistent with everything we observe, then the universe may be extraordinarily full of life and almost entirely silent. Worlds covered in the dinosaurian equivalent of sophisticated, cognitively complex animals, none of them quite reaching the specific threshold that makes interstellar communication possible. Minds without reach. Intelligence without transmission. The Fermi Paradox might be resolved not by some dramatic filter that destroys civilizations, but simply by the extraordinary contingency of the particular path that leads from intelligence to civilization. Most roads that reach the first waypoint do not reach the second. Most minds that evolve under Darwinian pressure never develop the specific combination of physical architecture, social structure, environmental pressure, and sequence of technological innovation that produces the capacity to speak across astronomical distances. We are the exception, the product of a specific Tuesday's failure. Let us return to that Tuesday one more time, from a slightly different angle. The Chicxulub impact has been studied with extraordinary precision. Scientists have drilled into the impact crater, a project completed in 2016, boring through the peak ring of the crater buried beneath the Yucatán seafloor, and recovered cores that preserve the immediate aftermath of the impact in astonishing detail. The chemistry of the rocks tells the story. The impact, the ejecta, the acid rain, the thermal pulse, the slow recovery of life over hundreds of thousands of years. The iridium anomaly, the thin layer of iridium-rich clay that marks the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary in rock sections around the world, was the first major evidence for the impact. Discovered by Luis and Walter Alvarez in 1980, iridium is rare in Earth's crust, but common in certain types of asteroids. Finding it in a globally distributed layer at exactly the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary was the first indication of what had happened. That discovery, one of the most remarkable detective stories in the history of science, set off decades of intense investigation that eventually confirmed the impact, identified the crater, characterized the impactor, and modeled the consequences. We know, from all of this work, exactly how close to disaster the world of the Late Cretaceous already was before the impact. The Deccan Traps, a massive sequence of volcanic eruptions in what is now Western India, were already releasing carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere for hundreds of thousands of years before the impact. Some research suggests this volcanic activity was already stressing Late Cretaceous ecosystems, reducing some populations and eliminating some species at the margins. The asteroid may have struck a biosphere that was already weakened. The extinction was perhaps a 1-2 punch, volcanic stress, followed by the catastrophic astronomical blow. In the counterfactual, the Deccan Traps still erupt. The volcanic stress still occurs, but the asteroid does not come. The ecosystems, stressed but not broken, slowly recover from the volcanic pressure as the eruption phase eventually wanes. The hadrosaurs that were declining in some regions recover. The diversity that was fraying at the edges stabilizes. The 1-2 punch is reduced to 1 punch, and the world absorbs it. The world is resilient when it is given the chance to be resilient. Ecosystems that have been building complexity for hundreds of millions of years are not fragile things. They have survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, sea level changes, the slow drift of continents. What they cannot survive, apparently, is the combination of a massive impact in sulfur-rich shallow waters, followed by years of global darkness. Take away one element of that combination, and the recovery begins. There is something worth dwelling on about the animals that were lost. The non-avian dinosaurs that went extinct 66 million years ago were not abstractions. They were individual animals, with individual lives. A Tyrannosaurus rex that went down in the darkness had hunted for years across a landscape it knew intimately. It had survived wounds. It had learned, through failure and success, which strategies for pursuing prey worked in which terrain. It had a brain that was, while not sophisticated by our standards, more capable than any cold-blooded reptile of equivalent size, capable of some degree of behavioral learning and individual memory. The hadrosaurs died in their herds. Animals that recognized each other's calls, that had maintained social bonds across years, that had perhaps recognized something like family relationships within their aggregations. The calls stopped. The herd relationships dissolved as animals too weak from starvation to move collapsed in the cold. The troodontids, the most cognitively complex of the non-avian dinosaurs, went last, perhaps, of the large groups. Small enough to survive on whatever scraps of food remained, clever enough to find those scraps in places less capable animals would have overlooked, but not small enough in the end. Not flexible enough in what they could eat. The darkness was too long, the cold too deep, the collapse of the food web too complete. When we mourn an extinction, when we grieve for species going extinct today, we are mourning what gets lost when a lineage ends. The knowledge accumulated in individual animals, the behavioral traditions of populations, the ecological relationships built up over centuries and millennia, none of this is fossilable. None of it is preserved in bone. It simply stops. The KPG extinction stopped 160 million years of that kind of accumulation in one geological instant. That is not a number it is easy to hold. 160 million years. By comparison, the entire history of primates is about 55 million years. Our genus, Homo, has existed for perhaps 2.5 million years. Anatomically, modern humans have existed for perhaps 300,000 years. Civilization as we know it, writing, agriculture, cities, is about 12,000 years old. 160 million years of dinosaurs. And then, a Tuesday. Here is what strikes me as the most profound implication of this entire thought experiment. The thing I keep returning to when I try to find the third layer of what it all means. The capacity you are exercising right now, the capacity to hold 66 million years of contingency in your mind, to trace the thread from a rock in space to a mammal in a burrow to you reading these words, is itself the most extraordinary product of the events we have been describing. No other animal does this. Not in the counterfactual world, not in our actual world. A crow can plan for the future and learn from the past, but it does not contemplate the evolutionary history that produced its own brain. An elephant can mourn its dead, but it does not ask what the world would have looked like if its lineage had never evolved. An octopus can solve novel problems with remarkable flexibility, but it does not wonder about the contingency of its own existence. We do. This is genuinely strange. This is the specific feature of human consciousness. This capacity for recursive self-reflection, for asking not just what is happening, but why it is happening, and what would have happened differently. That sets us apart from everything that came before. Not our tool use, not our language, not even our technology. Our capacity to contemplate our own contingency. Carl Sagan understood this. His version of the question, would Sauronithoides have become the contemplating species, writing books and asking what would have happened if the mammals had prevailed, was really a question about whether this specific capacity was inevitable in the universe, or whether it happened once by accident. He left the question open, as he should have. I have my own position, and I will state it plainly. I think that reflexive consciousness, the specific capacity to be aware of being aware, to contemplate one's own existence in deep time, to feel the vertigo of understanding oneself as contingent, may be extraordinarily rare. I think it requires not just intelligence, but the very specific accumulated culture of knowledge that allows any individual mind to situate itself in evolutionary history. A bird with the intelligence of a crow placed in the Cretaceous world without access to millions of years of accumulated scientific knowledge, would not spontaneously wonder about deep time. The wondering requires the knowledge. The knowledge requires the accumulation. The accumulation requires the writing. The writing requires civilization. The civilization requires the extinction. We are what we are because the extinction happened. Not just biologically, not just because the mammals expanded and the primates diversified and the hominids emerged, but culturally, intellectually, cosmically. We are capable of asking this particular question because we are the specific kind of mind that 12,000 years of civilization has made possible, and that civilization is the downstream consequence of a world reset 66 million years ago. Take away the asteroid, and the counterfactual world is richer in some ways. More ancient, more stable, less damaged, and it contains no one to ask why. The birds are the most honest answer to everything we have been exploring. Every morning, somewhere near, wherever you are reading this, birds are calling. They are announcing territory, finding mates, maintaining contact with social companions. Their calls are complex, far more complex than most people realize. Some species sing hundreds of distinct vocalizations. Some modify their songs based on cultural transmission from other individuals in their population. Some use calls in ways that recent research has found structurally similar, in limited ways, to aspects of human syntax. These birds are dinosaurs. This is not a metaphor. They are the literal, physical, genealogical descendants of the late Cretaceous theropods that shared the world with Tyrannosaurus rex and Triceratops and Troodon. Their feathers are modified scales whose evolution traces back 230 million years. Their wishbone, the furcula, is a fused clavicle that was already present in non-avian dinosaurs. Their feet, in many species, still carry the same basic three-toed design that left tracks in ancient mudflats alongside the tracks of hadrosaurs. They are the surviving branch of the great dinosaurian dynasty. They survived not because they were the biggest or the strongest. They survived because they were small, and because they could eat what the impact winter left available: seeds, insects, decaying organic matter. They survived because their metabolic rate and their small body size gave them a fighting chance in the cold and the dark. And when the darkness lifted, they were there, in a world that had been emptied of their relatives, and they expanded into every space that opened to them. There are today more than 10,000 species of birds. More species of bird than any other vertebrate group except fish. They have colonized every continent, every ocean, every climate zone, from the equatorial tropics to the Antarctic coast. They are the most species-rich and ecologically diverse class of land vertebrates alive, and every one of them carries, in its body plan and its physiology and its neural architecture, the inheritance of the age of dinosaurs. When you hear a bird call at dawn, something many of you listening to this will hear in the morning after this night's rest, you are hearing what is left. You are hearing the survivors of a world that ended on a Tuesday 66 million years ago. The last voices of a dynasty that ran for 160 million years before a rock arrived and changed everything. They made it. Transformed beyond recognition, but continuous. The thread of dinosaurian life was not cut by the extinction. It was narrowed to almost nothing, and then allowed to expand again in a changed world. The birds are the proof that dinosaurs were not finished, even when almost everything that had been dinosaurian was gone. In the counterfactual world, they would still exist, evolved along different paths, shaped by competition with their non-avian relatives, perhaps less diverse in some respects, because the ecological openness that allowed them to radiate so dramatically in our world would not have been present. But there, flying, calling, carrying the neural sophistication of the theropod lineage into whatever niches the counterfactual world had left open. They are the thread. In our world and in the one we have been imagining, the thread continues. This seems like the right place to rest. We have travelled far tonight. From the moment of impact that changed everything, backward to the world that was lost, and then forward through 66 million years of imagined time into a world that never was. We have asked what intelligence looks like without our particular accident. We have wondered whether consciousness of the kind that wonders about itself was ever inevitable, or whether it sits at the end of a chain of contingencies so specific that it might be among the rarest things in the universe. There are no comfortable answers, but comfort was never the point of this particular journey. The world is astonishing. The history that produced it is vaster and stranger than any mythology humans have ever invented, and more beautiful in its specific strangeness than any story we could have made up. That it produced us, minds capable of being astonished by it, is either the universe's most extraordinary accident or its most ordinary miracle, and we have not yet decided which. Tonight, somewhere, birds are roosting. Some of them in the same kind of trees that small feathered theropods roosted in at the end of the Cretaceous before the sky changed. They are sleeping in the way animals sleep, not thinking, not wondering, not holding the weight of 66 million years in their awareness. They are just alive and small and warm and here. That is enough for them. It is, perhaps, most of what any of us need. Let the big questions rest for a while. They have been patient questions for a very long time. They can wait through one night. The light will come in the morning, as it always has, as it has been coming for 4.5 billion years, through mass extinctions and ice ages, and the slow, improbable rise of something that can notice the light and ask why it is there. Let it come. You will be here for it. Rest now. The world that was lost is still half with us, in every bird that breathes and calls. And you are the part that can know this, and find it strange, and find it beautiful. The story of who survived the KPG extinction is not simply a story of small versus large. It is a story of what you can eat when everything stops growing, and how long you can wait for the world to recover. The impact winter, the period of darkness and cold that followed the Chicxulub impact, lasted in its most severe phase for perhaps 1 to 2 years. For perhaps 6 years after that, sunlight levels remained below what modern plants need to photosynthesize efficiently. For decades, the recovery of forest ecosystems was incomplete. This is a long time in biological terms. It is several generations for most large animals. It is effectively forever for animals that depend on fresh plant growth. What survived in the terrestrial environment were, broadly speaking, 4 categories of organism. The first, animals that could eat detritus. Organic matter that was already dead before the impact continued to be available as food. Rotting wood, decomposing leaf litter, the accumulated organic material of forest floors. Insects that fed on decomposing matter survived well. Small mammals and small reptiles that could eat those insects survived. Larger animals that could scavenge the bodies of dead dinosaurs survived briefly until the bodies were gone. The second, animals that could enter dormancy. Crocodilians, turtles, and some amphibians can reduce their metabolic rate dramatically during cold periods, surviving for months on stored fat without eating. This is why crocodilians and turtles survived the extinction, while the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs in the oceans and the large non-avian dinosaurs on land did not. The ability to shut down, to wait out the cold in a metabolic torpor, was a survival technology of the highest order. Some birds and small mammals can enter similar states. Small size helps, because the energy reserves needed to survive dormancy scale more favorably with small bodies. The third, animals with dietary flexibility. Omnivores, animals that could eat insects, seeds, mushrooms, carrion, and whatever else was available, had access to a broader range of food sources than specialists. The mammals that survived were predominantly small omnivores. The birds that survived were small, with beaks adapted to a variety of food types. Dietary flexibility is essentially cognitive flexibility applied to food, the ability to exploit whatever the environment offers, rather than being locked into one food source. The fourth, animals that could exploit seeds. Seeds are a remarkable survival resource in an impact winter scenario, because they do not require ongoing photosynthesis to remain nutritious. A seed is a package of stored energy and genetic information, sealed and protected, capable of surviving years in the soil without degrading significantly. Many plant species survive mass extinction events as seeds, even when all adult individuals die. And animals that could eat seeds, cracking open their protective coats to access the stored energy inside, had access to a food source that was unavailable to most of the dinosaurian megafauna. The early birds, small, seed-eating, with specialized beaks for cracking open hard seed coats, were extraordinarily well positioned. This is almost certainly why birds survived when their non-avian dinosaur relatives did not. not intelligence, not superior design, seeds. The ability to exploit the one food source that remained abundant and accessible through years of ecological collapse. In the counterfactual world, where the darkness does not descend and the food chain does not collapse, this survival sorting does not occur. The seed-cracking specialization of the early birds does not confer a survival advantage, because survival is not the crisis. The birds are there, but they are not suddenly liberated into a world without large dinosaurian competitors. They occupy their niches: aerial insect catching, small prey hunting, fruit eating in arboreal environments, alongside the non-avian theropods that share many of those niches. This has a specific implication for bird diversity in the counterfactual. In our world, birds underwent a dramatic radiation immediately after the extinction. Exactly the same kind of ecological opportunity that allowed mammals to diversify. With the non-avian dinosaurs gone, birds moved into niches they had previously not occupied. Giant flightless birds became the apex predators of some land masses for millions of years. The diversity of bird body sizes, diets, and ecological roles expanded enormously. In the counterfactual, none of this happens. Birds remain in the competitive niche space already occupied by their non-avian relatives. They are diverse, but constrained. The 10,000 species of birds alive in our world almost certainly do not exist in the counterfactual. Instead, there are perhaps a few hundred species of more modestly diverse birds, coexisting with the full range of non-avian theropods from whom they cannot easily differentiate their ecological roles. This is a loss of its own kind. The brilliant diversity of our modern bird life, the penguins and the hummingbirds and the albatrosses and the owls, is itself a product of the extinction. It too is downstream of a Tuesday. In the counterfactual world, the mammals are still there. They have been there since the Triassic, since before the dinosaurs reached their full dominance, in fact. Mammals evolved in parallel with the dinosaurs throughout the Mesozoic, occupying the ecological margins, the nocturnal niches, the small prey spaces that the dinosaurs either could not exploit or chose not to. By the end of the Cretaceous, mammals were actually more diverse than is often appreciated. The old image of a single lineage of small, generic, shrew-like mammals huddled in the dark is an oversimplification. The late Cretaceous mammalian fauna included burrowing species, semi-aquatic species, at least one lineage with a body size comparable to a small dog, and considerable dietary diversity. Some ate insects, some ate seeds, some were omnivores. They were ecologically varied, even if they were uniformly small. In the counterfactual world, this diversity continues, but it does not expand in the directions that our timeline produced. The critical constraint is ecological ceiling. Every ecological niche that a mammal might expand into is already occupied, often by a more experienced incumbent. Want to be a large herbivore? The hadrosaurs have been doing that for tens of millions of years, with sophisticated tooth batteries, herd behavior, and body plans refined for exactly that role. Want to be an apex predator? The tyrannosaurs have been apex predators for longer than Homo sapiens has been a species. Want to be a medium-sized omnivore? The small theropods are already there, in numbers, with behavioral sophistication that the Cretaceous mammals cannot match. Every time a mammal lineage, through mutation and selection, begins to trend toward a larger body size or a more prominent ecological role, it runs into competition from animals that have been perfecting that role for far longer. The competitive exclusion principle, the idea that two species competing for exactly the same resources cannot coexist indefinitely, and that the one less well adapted to the niche will eventually be excluded, operates as a ceiling on mammalian expansion. This does not mean the mammals are static. They continue to evolve. Some lineages develop novel ecological roles that the dinosaurs have not yet explored, perhaps very deep burrowing, or exploitation of food resources at the forest grassland margin that small theropods ignore, or semi-aquatic niches in freshwater systems. But these are marginal roles, by definition. They are the ecological leftovers. Over tens of millions of years, the mammals of the counterfactual world diversify into a range of small-bodied ecological specialists. Some of them, inevitably, develop larger body sizes as the world changes and new niches appear at the edges of the dinosaurian world. The cooling climate, the appearance of grasslands, the ice ages, All of these create brief opportunities for mammalian expansion that quick-evolving, reproductively fast mammals can exploit. But they are always constrained by the dinosaurian context. A mammal that grows large in the grasslands finds, eventually, that it is competing with the grassland-adapted hadrosaur descendants. A mammal that becomes a pursuit predator finds itself in competition with the evolved tyrannosaur lineages that have been perfecting pursuit predation for 30 additional million years. The result? A mammalian fauna of the counterfactual world that is varied and ecologically interesting, but which never produces anything like the whales, the elephants, the horses, the lions, the primates that arose in our world. The primates in particular, the lineage that leads to us, remain small, nocturnal, insectivorous, or seed-eating. They never get the opportunity to expand into the large-bodied, arboreal, fruit-eating, socially complex forms that eventually led to the great apes. We do not exist. Our entire lineage, every hominid species that ever lived, every culture that ever rose, every language that was ever spoken, does not exist in the counterfactual. Not because the evolutionary potential was not there, but because the opportunity never opened. This is perhaps the most vertiginous implication of the whole scenario. The people who are contemplating this scenario, whose minds are holding this thought experiment, whose existence makes the thought experiment possible, are themselves part of what the thought experiment concludes would not exist. We are thinking ourselves out of existence, and finding, in the process, that existence is far more improbable than it feels from the inside. There is a question that science cannot answer, but that the imagination cannot avoid. What did the late Cretaceous world feel like from the inside? What did a hadrosaur experience, in whatever sense experience is the right word, moving with its herd through a warm Cretaceous floodplain? What did a tyrannosaur process, in whatever cognitive sense processing is accurate, when it paused at a water's edge and looked at the reflection it could not have understood? What did Troodon perceive through those large binocular eyes in the dense Cretaceous forest where it hunted? We cannot know. We have bones and sediment and endocasts and footprint trackways. We do not have the inner life that animated them, but we can reason about it. And what the reasoning produces is the unsettling conclusion that the world of the non-avian dinosaurs was not empty of experience, not empty of sensation, of social recognition, of something that served the functional role of emotion in behavior, even if it was organized and felt entirely differently from anything we know. Hadrosaurs recognized each other as individuals. The specificity of their calls, the variation within populations of the same species, the apparent individuality of vocal patterns suggests recognition of conspecific identity at a level beyond simple species recognition. They formed and maintained social bonds across time. When predators came, the response was coordinated in ways that individual reaction to a stimulus cannot explain. Something was passing through the herd, information, assessment, decision, in ways that required each animal to be aware of the state of other animals around it. This is the beginning of social cognition. Not human social cognition, not anything approaching what we call theory of mind in the full sense, but something that served similar functional purposes. Awareness that other individuals have states that are relevant to one's own behavior, and that those states can be read and responded to. The troodontids, hunting together in pairs or small groups, the evidence for cooperative hunting is suggestive, if not conclusive, were processing something more than simple stimulus response in their pursuit of prey. They were tracking prey movement, anticipating prey behavior, coordinating with conspecifics in real time. These are cognitively demanding tasks that require memory, attention, and something like prediction. None of this is human experience. I am not claiming it is, but it is experience in some sense. The world registered on a nervous system, producing states that influence behavior in animals that were far more complex than the movie monsters or dim-witted giants of popular imagination. When those animals went into the darkness of the impact winter, they went as experiencers of a world they had known intimately. And when they died, of cold, of starvation, of the slow collapse of the ecosystem around them, they died as individuals, each one the end of a particular history of learned behavior and social relationship. The extinction was not just the death of species, it was the death of minds. Modest minds, not approaching what we have become, but minds. In the counterfactual, those minds continue. They grow, slowly, more capable over millions of years. The world they inhabit becomes richer in cognitive complexity, even if it never quite reaches the threshold we have crossed. The mental landscape of the planet, the aggregate of all the experience occurring simultaneously across the biosphere, is different from the mental landscape of our world. Not less rich, just different. Different minds, finding different things significant, responding to different patterns, driven by different evolutionary histories. A world of consciousness that we cannot imagine, because we are too deeply embedded in our own version of it. This is the part where I have to be honest about what I think, rather than what I can defend with evidence. Does the counterfactual world have meaning? Does our world have meaning? Is there a difference between a world with intelligent minds and a world without, in any sense that goes beyond the preferences of those minds? I do not think the universe has opinions about this. The universe does not prefer worlds with civilizations. The physics does not care whether consciousness develops on a planet orbiting a G-type star. The question of meaning is a human question, a question that only exists because we exist to ask it. And yet, the fact that we exist to ask it feels, from the inside, like something. It feels like it matters that there is something capable of noticing the depth and strangeness of the world. Not because the world needs to be noticed to be real. The counterfactual world is real, in the sense that all possible worlds are real as possibilities, whether or not they are actual, but because the noticing is itself remarkable, and the loss of it would be, from our perspective, a genuine loss. The Late Cretaceous world had 10,000 species of dinosaurs, rich ecosystems, intricate ecological relationships, individual animals with their own experiences of a world that will never exist again. That world was rich, it had value in itself, not because anyone was there to notice it. The extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs was a loss of something genuinely valuable. Not because they were heading somewhere we should prefer, but because they were already somewhere worth being. The counterfactual world, in which they survived and evolved and eventually produced some form of sophisticated cognition, would also have been worth being. Its absence in our timeline is also a genuine loss. We are not the only thing that matters. We are just the thing that is currently doing the mattering in this particular corner of a very large and very old universe. That is a strange kind of humility. Not the humility that says we are insignificant. We are clearly not insignificant in any ecological sense in our planet's history. But the humility that says we are not the point. We are an outcome, and the world was already meaningful before we arrived to call it that. The asteroid did not make the world more meaningful by eliminating the dinosaurs and creating the conditions for our emergence. The dinosaurs were not waiting to be replaced by something that would make better use of the planet. They were using the planet already, in their own way, as fully and as completely as any lineage has ever used a planet. We came after them by accident, and we named what they were. We dug up their bones and reconstructed their world, and tried, imperfectly, to understand how they lived. That is perhaps the only kind of tribute that makes any sense to pay to something that no longer exists, to try, as carefully as we can, to understand it. This documentary is that attempt. Inadequate, necessarily. We cannot fully comprehend 160 million years of lived experience from bones and sediment, and the faint impressions of behaviour preserved in stone. But we try. We hold the question open. We sit with the strangeness of a world that was complete without us, and that we can now only know through what remains. That seems like the right place to end, not with an answer, but with the question itself, held carefully in the darkness before sleep. The world is old. We are new. The dinosaurs were here for much longer than we have been, and they were not preparation for us. They were themselves. Before we go further, let us slow down and actually try to feel the scale of what we are talking about. Not just say the number 66 million and move on, but genuinely try to comprehend it. Because comprehending it changes how the counterfactual feels. 66 million years. Every recorded human history, every war, every empire, every invention, every language, fits into the last 12,000 years. 1% of 1% of the time since the asteroid hit. The entire span of our species, Homo sapiens, is perhaps 300,000 years. Less than half of 1% of the time since the Cretaceous ended. The entire genus Homo, every species in our lineage back to the earliest toolmakers, is perhaps 2.5 million years, less than 4% of the time we are discussing. If you compressed the 66 million years since the KPG extinction into a single calendar year, the entirety of recorded human history, everything from the first writing in Mesopotamia to this moment, would occur in the final 50 minutes of December 31st. The entire evolutionary history of our species, Homo sapiens, would begin around 9 in the evening on December 29th. Our genus Homo would appear on December 16th. By contrast, in this compressed year, the dinosaurs that survived the extinction, the birds, would have been present since January 1st. 66 million years of bird evolution in a world they largely share with us now corresponds to the entire calendar year. The non-avian dinosaurs, in the timeline of this compressed year, existed from around March of the year before, in a preceding calendar year. 160 million years corresponds to more than 2 full calendar years in this compression. 2 full years of dinosaurian dominance, followed by an asteroid on January 1st of the new year, followed by 11.5 months of mammalian radiation, followed by us in the final 50 minutes of December. Feel what that means for the counterfactual. When we ask what 66 million additional years of dinosaur evolution would produce, we are asking what fills the rest of that calendar year, from January 1st to December 31st, but in a world where the mammals never got their turn at January. 66 million years is an almost inconceivably long time in which to develop, refine, elaborate, and transform a lineage that had already demonstrated, over the preceding 2 calendar years, that it was capable of extraordinary evolutionary creativity. 160 million years of non-avian dinosaur evolution produced Troodon, an animal with a brain at the low end of the bird-mammal range. 66 more million years, under more intense cognitive selection pressure, applied to a lineage that was already at that threshold, would have produced something. We cannot know what, precisely, but it would have been real. It would have been remarkable by any standard available at the time. The tragedy of the KPG extinction is not just that it killed the dinosaurs, it is that it killed the potential in the dinosaur lineage. Whatever Troodon's descendants might have become over the next 66 million years, we will never know. That particular evolutionary experiment was ended before the results were in. There is a story about the flowering plants that is usually told without the dinosaurs, and it is the poorer for that omission. The angiosperms, the flowering plants, the group that today includes everything from grasses to oak trees to roses to rice, began their extraordinary diversification in the early Cretaceous, roughly 120 million years ago. Their rise is one of the most dramatic events in the history of plant life, and its causes and consequences are still actively debated in paleobotany. What is clear is that by the late Cretaceous, flowering plants had already come to dominate most terrestrial plant communities, transforming the forests and floodplains of the world. What drove their success? Several things, probably acting together. Their seeds are often enclosed in protective, nutrient-rich fruits that attract animal dispersers. A co-evolutionary relationship of extraordinary productivity. Their reproductive systems are more flexible than those of the gymnosperms they largely replaced. Their leaves are often broader and more efficient at photosynthesis in variable light conditions. And, critically, they produce flowers, structures specifically adapted to attract pollinators, primarily insects, creating co-evolutionary relationships of mutual benefit that allowed both the plants and their pollinators to diversify enormously. The fruit relationship is the one that matters most for our counterfactual. Fruit is, evolutionarily speaking, a bribe offered by a plant to an animal. Eat this sweet, nutritious package and carry the seeds inside it somewhere new. The animal gets food, the plant gets its seeds dispersed. It is a win for both parties, and it has been so profitable that it has driven the independent evolution of fruit eating in dozens of animal lineages across hundreds of millions of years. In our world, the post-extinction world gave frugivory to the mammals, the primates in particular, who became the primary partners of the flowering plants in tropical forests, and whose cognitive evolution was shaped, in part, by the demands of finding and evaluating fruit. In the counterfactual, the mammals remain too small and ecologically constrained to fill this role at scale. The fruit is still there, hanging from the trees of the expanding angiosperm forests. But who eats it? The small theropods. By the end of the Cretaceous, there were already theropods that appear to have incorporated significant amounts of plant material, including potentially fruits, into their diets. The oviraptorosaurs, with their toothless beaks, were probably processing plant material as well as small animals. Some small dromaeosaurs, in forested environments, may have been exploiting arboreal resources, including fruit. The behavioral transition from small prey hunting to fruit eating is not a large one for a small, intelligent, arboreal theropod. Both require navigating complex, three-dimensional environments, assessing food quality, and competing with others for access to limited, patchily distributed resources. In the counterfactual world, with 66 million additional years for the angiosperm forests to expand, and the small theropod lineages to specialize, the coevolutionary relationship between fruit-bearing plants and fruit-eating theropods would have deepened and diversified. The plants would have evolved fruits better adapted to theropod sensory systems, perhaps more colourful in the wavelengths theropod vision could best detect, more aromatic in ways that matched theropod olfactory sensitivity, with seed sizes and seed coat toughnesses calibrated to theropod digestive systems. The theropods would have evolved cognitive and physical features better suited to exploiting diverse fruit resources across seasonal cycles and complex three-dimensional forest environments. This is the coevolutionary pathway that, in our world, produced the primates. Not through any pre-planning or telos, but through the mutual selection pressure of plant and animal, each shaping the other over millions of generations. In the counterfactual, it produces something analogous but dinosaurian, a lineage of small, arboreal, fruit-specialized theropods with increasingly sophisticated spatial memory, social learning, and behavioral flexibility, shaped by the demands of a constantly changing and spatially complex food source. The flowering plants are, in a very real sense, the engines of intelligence. Not just in our world, but in any world where they expand, and any animal lineage that exploits them heavily faces sufficient cognitive selection pressure. In the counterfactual, they drive the dinosaurs toward minds. Slowly, over geological time, through the same mechanism that drove our own ancestors. The Pleistocene ice ages, the series of glacial cycles that began roughly 2.5 million years ago and have continued to the present day, with the current interglacial being our relatively warm moment, are one of the most powerful evolutionary forces in recent Earth history. They transformed habitats repeatedly, forced migrations and range contractions and expansions, drove many species to extinction, and, in the human lineage, appear to have been directly associated with the most dramatic expansions of brain size and cognitive complexity in our evolutionary history. Why do ice ages promote cognitive evolution? The mechanism is not simple, but the core of it is variation. Environments that fluctuate rapidly between warm and cold, wet and dry, open and forested, require behavioral responses faster than genetic adaptation can track. An animal that can change what it eats, where it lives, and how it finds food in response to environmental change, through learning and behavioral flexibility, rather than through waiting for selection to produce genetic change over generations, has an enormous survival advantage. The specific character of Ice Age climate in Africa, the region where hominid evolution occurred in our world, created conditions of intense variability over relatively short timescales. Forest-savanna boundary shifts, tracked by pollen records, show rapid vegetation changes that would have required behavioral adaptability of exactly the kind that large brains provide. The hominids that survived were the ones who could track these changes, communicate about them, and transmit information within and between groups. In the counterfactual world, the Pleistocene ice ages occur on the same schedule. Orbital mechanics are unchanged. The ice ages impose the same kind of cognitive selection pressure on whatever lineages are positioned to respond. The difference is which lineages those are. In our world, the ice ages hit a primate lineage that had already been expanding its cognitive capacities for tens of millions of years in an ecological context. The African savanna forest mosaic that had been specifically promoting cognitive evolution for millions more years. The ice ages were, in a sense, the final push that took a lineage already moving in the direction of high intelligence and pushed it across the threshold. In the counterfactual, the ice ages hit theropod lineages that have been moving in similar directions under similar pressures for tens of millions of years. The specific lineage that will be most affected depends on where it is geographically and what its ecology is at the time the ice ages begin. If there is a lineage of cognitively sophisticated, socially complex, arboreal or semi-arboreal small theropods in a tropical environment with ice age-driven vegetational variability, the African equivalent in the counterfactual geography, then the ice ages could serve as the same kind of final push. This is genuinely speculative. I want to be clear about that. The specifics of where the most cognitively advanced theropod lineages would be 60 million years into the counterfactual, and whether their geographic position would expose them to the particular ice age dynamics that seem to have been important in hominid evolution, cannot be determined. The contingencies are too many and too dependent on details we cannot trace. But the principle holds. Ice ages are intelligence filters, and they would filter the counterfactual fauna just as they filtered ours. Whatever lineage was cognitively best positioned to respond to rapid environmental change when the ice ages arrived would have been selected for enhanced cognitive capacity through the glacial cycles. Given 60 million years of prior cognitive evolution in some theropod lineages, the ice ages might have pushed one of those lineages to something remarkable. One of the most consistent patterns in the evolution of intelligence is its association with intermediate body size. The largest animals on Earth, the great whales, the elephants, the sauropod dinosaurs, tend to have brains that are large in absolute terms, but small relative to their body mass. They invest their metabolic budget in body maintenance rather than neural tissue. The smallest animals, insects, small rodents, have brains that are small, even in absolute terms, though sometimes impressively large relative to body mass. The animals with the highest absolute brain sizes and high relative brain-to-body ratios tend to cluster in an intermediate zone. Medium-bodied, metabolically active, socially complex. Humans fit into this zone. We are roughly 70 kilograms, with a brain of approximately 1.4 kilograms. Dolphins, elephants, great apes, corvids all fit into the intermediate zone where the metabolic investment in brain tissue is feasible and the body size is large enough to house a brain capable of complex function. Troodon, at approximately 50 kilograms, was already in this zone. Its descendants, in the counterfactual world, could maintain this body size range while increasing the proportion of metabolic investment allocated to the brain, exactly the trend that characterized hominid evolution, where brain size increased dramatically while body size increased relatively modestly over the past several million years. The body size question also connects to something else, the relationship between body size and generation time, and therefore the rate at which selection can operate. Small animals breed faster. More generations per unit time means faster evolutionary response to selection pressure. A small theropod with a 1 to 2 year generation time can respond to selection pressure on brain size far faster than a hadrosaur with a decade-long generation time. This is one of the reasons small-bodied lineages tend to be more evolutionarily innovative. Their faster generation time gives selection more opportunities to act per unit of geological time. In the counterfactual world, the small theropods, the cognitively sophisticated, intermediate-bodied lineages that are the most interesting for our purposes, have exactly the generation time that allows rapid evolutionary response to cognitive selection pressure. If the ecological conditions create strong selection for larger, more powerful brains, those brains can evolve faster in small-bodied animals than in large ones. This is an underappreciated aspect of why primates, rather than elephants, produced human-level intelligence, despite elephants having arguably comparable levels of social sophistication. Primate generation times, measured in years rather than decades, allowed faster cognitive evolution over the relevant timescales. The counterfactual small theropods have the same advantage. The discovery of fire, specifically the transition from awareness of fire as a natural phenomenon to deliberate control and production of fire, is one of the most consequential events in the history of intelligence on Earth. And it is also, perhaps, one of the most contingent. Fire occurs naturally in nearly every terrestrial ecosystem. Lightning strikes dry vegetation. Volcanic eruptions ignite forests. Any intelligent animal with sufficient exposure to natural fire would eventually learn that fire can be carried, that it consumes fuel, that it can be managed. Whether any animal in the counterfactual world makes this transition depends on the intersection of cognitive capacity, body plan, ecological exposure, and chance. What fire does for the transition from intelligence to civilization is almost too large to enumerate fully. Cooking food increases caloric bioavailability. Cooked starch and protein release more energy per gram than raw equivalents, allowing the brain tissue that requires approximately 20% of our total caloric budget to be sustainably maintained without consuming so much time in food gathering that there is no time for anything else. Richard Wrangham, the Harvard primatologist, has argued persuasively that cooking was the key ecological innovation that made the human brain size possible because it allowed smaller guts and more efficient energy extraction from food. Beyond nutrition, fire provides warmth, allowing intelligent small-bodied animals to occupy cold environments year-round, expanding their ecological range. Fire provides light, extending the productive day beyond the hours of daylight and allowing social activity, conversation, storytelling, the transmission of cultural knowledge, in the hours when most predators are active and most animals are dormant. Fire provides protection against predators, allowing smaller animals to sleep more safely in open environments. And fire is the basis of all heat-based technology: pottery, metallurgy, the processing of plant foods into forms that can be stored and traded. Any theropod lineage that discovered fire would be transformed by it, cognitively, ecologically, and eventually technologically, in ways that would rapidly distinguish it from its competitors. The question is not whether fire would have been useful. The question is whether any theropod lineage, in 66 million years of continued evolution, in a world where fire occurs naturally and where some lineages develop the cognitive capacity to perceive patterns in the natural world, would have made the transition to fire control. I think the probability is non-trivial. Not certain, the transition requires a specific combination of cognitive capacity, body plan, ecological exposure, and fortunate circumstance that is not guaranteed to occur, but not negligible either. Humans made this transition from a lineage that had not been developing intelligence for as long as the counterfactual theropods would have, and the discovery of fire in the counterfactual theropod world would set in motion a cascade of consequences that could, over subsequent millions of years, transform the cognitive and technological landscape of the planet in ways we cannot fully anticipate. If one theropod lineage discovers fire, and I stress this is a genuine uncertainty, not a certainty, the counterfactual world changes dramatically. The intelligence asymmetry between fire users and non-fire users is enormous, even at early stages of fire control. The lineage that controls fire, eats better, is safer at night, can occupy cold environments, and has the social context, long evenings gathered around fire, that promotes the kind of extended social learning and information sharing that drives cultural evolution. The cognitive advantages compound over generations in a way that selection on raw neural capacity cannot match. This is, I think, the most interesting and most uncertain node in the counterfactual. Whether fire gets discovered determines the entire subsequent trajectory of intelligence in that world, and it is genuinely unknown. We have been on Earth for all of this thinking. Let us step back, once more, to the largest scale available to us. The Milky Way galaxy contains somewhere between 100 billion and 400 billion stars. A substantial fraction of those stars, current estimates suggest more than 20%, have planets in the habitable zone where liquid water could exist. The galaxy is approximately 13 billion years old. Life on Earth arose within approximately 500 million years of the planet's formation. If life arises this readily wherever conditions are suitable, the galaxy could be teeming with living worlds. And yet, silence. No confirmed detection of any signal from any extraterrestrial intelligence, despite decades of searching with increasingly sensitive instruments. The radio silence of the cosmos is not a settled matter. We have not searched comprehensively, and there are many reasons an intelligent civilization might be radio silent, even if it exists. But the silence is notable. It presses for explanation. The Fermi Paradox, where is everybody, has generated dozens of proposed resolutions. Perhaps civilizations inevitably destroy themselves before becoming detectable. Perhaps they deliberately hide. Perhaps they communicate in ways we have not yet thought to look for. Perhaps they are here and we have not recognized them. The scenario we have been exploring tonight offers a different resolution, one that does not require any dramatic filter or cosmic catastrophe. It suggests that the transition from intelligence to civilization may be genuinely rare, dependent on a specific kind of ecological reset that provides cognitive flexibility with both the ecological space to expand and the specific physical and social conditions, hands, fire, language, agriculture, that allow intelligence to compound into civilization. Most worlds with complex life might be at the stage of the counterfactual Earth, rich, diverse, ecologically sophisticated, with some intelligent species living interesting and cognitively complex lives. But those species are not building radio telescopes, they are not launching probes, they are not sending coded signals into the void in hopes that someone will answer. They exist, but they do not reach. In this resolution, the cosmic silence is not evidence of absence. It is evidence of the rarity of the specific path that leads from intelligence to interstellar-capable civilization. The universe is not empty. It may be full of the equivalent of counterfactual Earths, worlds of magnificent life and modest minds, with civilizations like ours arising only occasionally, separated by vast distances of space and time, their brief windows of radio-transmitting behavior unlikely to overlap with anyone else's. We might be alone, not because life is rare, but because civilization is. And civilization might be rare, not because there is anything fundamentally preventing it, but because the specific contingencies required to produce it, the asteroid, the sulfur, the survivors, the ecological opportunity, the specific evolutionary path through 60 million years of primate evolution, may not repeat in any simple way. This is not a comfortable resolution, but it may be the most honest one available. It is worth spending time in the specifics. The abstract evolutionary arguments are important, but there is something additionally valuable in trying to picture the world concretely, in trying to see it with whatever imprecision our imagination can manage from this far away. The counterfactual world, at approximately the equivalent of our present day, 66 million years after the asteroid's absence, would look like this. Stand on a hillside in what would correspond to Central North America in our world. The sky above is the same blue. The atmospheric composition is similar. The sun is the same age and the same distance. The physics of light, scattering in nitrogen and oxygen, is unchanged. But nearly everything else is different. The grasslands below are vast. Grass did evolve in this world, driven by the same climatic forces that drove it in ours, appearing in the Oligocene equivalent and expanding through the Miocene equivalent as the climate continued its long cooling. But the animals that inhabit the grasslands are not horses or bison. They are derived hadrosaurs, smaller than their Cretaceous ancestors, their legs longer and more efficient for sustained locomotion on open terrain, their tooth batteries modified for grinding the tough silica-rich grass that would have provided a significant digestive challenge to the dental systems of the Late Cretaceous. Their coloration is elaborate. 66 million years of sexual selection and species recognition in social animals has produced plumage of extraordinary variety. Reds and greens and yellows and iridescent blues in the males of breeding season. More cryptic browns and tans at other times and in females. Not feathers in the downy sense. These are social display structures as much as insulation, broad and structured, capable of being raised and fanned in display. They call constantly. Their calls are more complex than anything the Late Cretaceous could produce, shaped by 66 million additional years of selection on social communication. The calls carry information about individual identity, current emotional state, resource location, and threat assessment, in ways that behavioral ecologists in our world would find structurally interesting. Not quite language, in the sense of fully symbolic reference, but more than simple signaling. Something in between, for which we do not have a word. In the middle distance, moving along the edge of the grassland and the tree line, a group of larger animals. These are not derived hadrosaurs. They are derived ceratopsians, the lineage that, in our timeline, ended with Triceratops. In the counterfactual, the ceratopsians went through their own 66 million year transformation. The horns are gone in this lineage, or rather, they have been elaborated into something different, more elaborate cranial display structures of bone and keratinized tissue that are used in visual communication between individuals. Their bodies are larger than any Cretaceous ceratopsian, shaped by continued arms race dynamics with the larger predators of the counterfactual world. They move in a loose grouping that is not quite a herd, more like the fluid social structure of elephants, with recognized individual relationships and apparent family groupings, maintained by vocalizations that carry across several kilometers of open terrain. In the sky, birds. More than 10,000 species of birds exist in our world, product of the extraordinary radiation that followed the KPG extinction. In the counterfactual, the number is smaller, perhaps several thousand species, constrained by the ecological competition they face from their non-avian relatives for many of the niches that birds occupied freely in our world. But they are there, and they have evolved in their own directions, shaped by 66 million years of coexistence with the non-avian dinosaurs, rather than domination of a world from which those relatives were absent. The birds of the counterfactual are, in some ways, more specialized than our birds. They occupy only those niches that their non-avian relatives have not already saturated. High-altitude soaring, certain marine environments, specific arboreal niches, too small or too demanding for the larger non-avian forms. They are smaller on average because the ecological space for large-bodied birds, filled in our world by ostriches and emus, and the now extinct terror birds, is occupied by non-avian bipedal dinosaurs in the counterfactual, and in the tree line. Watching with those large forward-facing eyes, the ones that are interesting. A group of small feathered theropods, perhaps 30 centimeters at the shoulder, weighing 6 to 8 kilograms. Their coloration is variable. Individuals differ visibly from each other in ways that other members of the group appear to recognize, responding differently to known individuals than to strangers. They carry objects, a stone in one individual's hands, a stick in another's. The stone is being used to crack open a hard-shelled seed. This is not novel behavior for the group. It is transmitted, observed, practiced, improved across generations. They have been watching the grassland below for perhaps an hour. Their attention alternates between the grazing hadrosaur group and each other. They appear to be communicating about what they observe, in vocal sequences that vary and respond to each other, in ways that suggest information transfer rather than simple signaling. One individual makes a specific call. Two others orient toward a specific area of the grassland, then look back at the caller. The caller makes the same call again, with a slight variation. The other two resume their individual activities. What passed between them? We cannot know. Whether this constitutes language in any meaningful sense, whether it involves symbolic reference to specific observed features of the world, is exactly the kind of question that would require years of behavioral study to begin to answer for a living animal, and that we cannot answer at all for an animal in a counterfactual world. But it is communication, complex, varied, apparently responsive to specific information, apparently transmitting information that influences behavior. These animals are not us. They are not heading toward us. They have their own trajectory, shaped by 66 million years of specific ecological history in a specific world. But they are something. They are the most cognitively sophisticated terrestrial vertebrates in their world, holding that position in the way that we hold it in ours, not through any single dramatic innovation, but through the accumulated effect of millions of generations of selection for the ability to navigate a complex social and ecological world more effectively. They will be here in some evolved form for tens of millions of years more. Where they go, whether the selection pressures of their world over that additional time push them toward or across the threshold of civilization building intelligence, is genuinely unknown. There is a mathematical way of thinking about the contingency of our existence that is simultaneously illuminating and deeply vertiginous. Consider all the events that had to occur, in sequence, to produce the moment you are experiencing right now. The formation of the solar system from a specific molecular cloud in a specific region of the galaxy, approximately 4.5 billion years ago. The formation of the Moon from the collision of a Mars-sized body with the early Earth, a collision that stabilized Earth's axial tilt and helped create the conditions for a relatively stable long-term climate. The emergence of life, roughly 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, from chemistry, in a specific set of environmental conditions. The development of photosynthesis, which transformed the atmosphere. The emergence of eukaryotic cells, the emergence of multicellularity, the Cambrian explosion, the development of vertebrates, the conquest of land by the early tetrapods, the Permian extinction, which reshaped everything, the rise of the dinosaurs, and then, 66 million years ago, the asteroid. Each of these events was not inevitable. Each could have gone differently. A slightly different collision trajectory for the proto-moon, a slightly different chemistry in the origin of life, a slightly different trajectory for the Chicxulub impactor, and the chain that eventually produced you is broken. Something else happens instead. Perhaps something equally interesting. Perhaps not. But not this. The probability of the exact chain of events that produced any specific living being approaches zero, when calculated across all the contingencies that had to be navigated. This is not a comforting thought, if what you were looking for was cosmic security, but it is an honest one, and there is something genuinely bracing about it, something that changes how the world looks when you hold it carefully. Every morning you wake up is the outcome of an improbable chain of events that had no obligation to produce you. Every day you exist is, from the perspective of deep time, an astonishing contingency. The alternative, that you were inevitable, that the universe was always going to produce you specifically, that your existence was written into the physics of the Big Bang, is a less interesting story. It takes away the wonder of improbability and replaces it with the comfort of necessity. And necessity is not what the evidence suggests. The evidence suggests that we are here by accident, that the accident was large and ancient and involved many steps, each of which could have been different, that the counterfactual world we have been exploring tonight, the world where the accident did not happen, where the hadrosaurs kept moving through their floodplains and Troodon kept hunting in the forests and the small mammals stayed small, is a world that is, in some deep sense, equally valid, equally real as a possibility, equally worth contemplating. We are the outcome that happened to happen. And there is a strange dignity in that. Not the dignity of having been chosen, but the dignity of being rare, of being the branch of possibility that actualized, against enormous odds, into something capable of recognizing its own improbability. There is a final thought I want to leave you with before the night ends. In the Amazon rainforest, in the cloud forests of Central America, in the tropical forests of Southeast Asia, there are birds whose cognitive abilities are genuinely extraordinary. Corvids that use tools, plan for the future, recognize individual human faces, and pass information about those faces to their offspring through social learning. Parrots that use language-like communication in ways that experimental evidence suggests goes beyond simple conditioning into something approaching symbolic reference. Macaws, toucans, hummingbirds, eagles, each adapted in extraordinary ways to their specific ecological context, each carrying in their nervous system the architectural heritage of the theropod lineage. These are the descendants of the late Cretaceous birds that survived the extinction. They carry, in their physiology, the inheritance of 160 million years of non-avian dinosaur evolution, followed by 66 million years of avian radiation, into a world that the extinction had opened for them. Their cognitive sophistication, genuinely remarkable in the corvids and parrots, elegantly calibrated to specific ecological demands in other lineages, is the product of that entire span. The counterfactual animals we have been imagining tonight, the arboreal fruit-eating small theropods with their increasingly complex brains, the sophisticated social hunters of the counterfactual grasslands, the Ice Age survivors who pushed cognitive frontiers further than any Cretaceous theropod had managed, would be related to these birds, different branches of the same broad tree, evolved in a different world, under different pressures, toward different cognitive endpoints, but related. When a crow solves a multi-step problem to retrieve a piece of food, using tools it has never encountered before, in a sequence that behavioral ecologists recognize as genuine causal reasoning, it is doing something that its ancestors were already beginning to do in the late Cretaceous. The seeds of that intelligence were present before the extinction. The extinction simply redirected the lineage, transforming it from one branch among many in a rich dinosaurian world into the survivors, the only branch left carrying that particular cognitive heritage. In the counterfactual world, the crow's equivalent would not need to be an avian bird. It would be a non-avian theropod. perhaps physically similar to some of its Cretaceous ancestors, feathered, bipedal, medium-brained, socially complex, operating in an ecological context that had given it 66 million more years to develop. Capable of things the crow cannot do, probably, but recognizably in the same lineage of developing intelligence that the birds of our world represent. When you hear a crow call, or a raven, or a jay, or a parrot in a tree, you are hearing the sound of that lineage continuing, the one that survived, the small branch that made it through the darkness and came out the other side into a world that was suddenly, unexpectedly, entirely available to them. They took what they needed. They spread across every continent. They became 10,000 species. They learned to make tools and plan for the future and recognize individual human faces and mourn their dead. They are still here, 66 million years after the asteroid hit, still evolving, still becoming, and they remember nothing of what was lost, because they cannot. Only we can do that. Only we look back across the deep time and try to imagine what the world would have been and feel something for its absence. That capacity to grieve for a world we never knew, to imagine alternatives we cannot verify, to feel the weight of contingency even in the midst of our own existence, is perhaps the strangest and most specifically human thing about us. The dinosaurs did not worry about going extinct. They did not know they were going extinct. The last Troodon in the last cold forest did not contemplate what its lineage might have become, or mourn the 66 million years of evolution that the approaching darkness was about to terminate. We do the mourning for them. We do the imagining. We build the counterfactual worlds and walk through them in our minds and feel the weight of what they contain. This is an extraordinary thing to be able to do. The counterfactual world is as real as the imagining made it, and it will wait for you to return to it in whatever form your own mind needs to revisit it. The questions that remain about intelligence and contingency and the silence of the cosmos and what it means that we are here will remain too. They are the best kind of questions, the ones that stay open, the ones that keep the mind moving. Let the depth of time that you have been holding tonight settle into something quieter. 66 million years is a long time to carry, and you have carried it well. The birds are out there, somewhere in the dark, roosting, the small, warm descendants of the great dynasty. You are out there too, warm and alive, and improbably here, the product of all those Tuesday contingencies stacked one behind the other across geological time. There is a humility required in this subject that it would be dishonest to omit. Everything we know about non-avian dinosaurs comes from bones, and from the things that bones can preserve: shape, size, relative proportions, pathologies that show evidence of injury or disease, growth rings that reveal developmental history, endocasts that approximate brain shape. Occasionally, exceptionally preserved specimens give us more. Skin texture, pigment cells in feather barbules that allow reconstruction of colour patterns, soft tissue impressions, stomach contents, nesting behaviour inferred from the positions of adults near eggs and young. But behaviour is almost entirely inaccessible. The trackways of dinosaurs, their footprints preserved in ancient mud and subsequently lithified into stone, tell us something about locomotion, about how they moved relative to each other in groups, about their speeds and their gaits. The bone beds tell us something about social aggregation. But the inner life, the cognitive processes, the emotional states, the social relationships, these are lost. This means that every claim we make about what Troodon was capable of, or what the hadrosaurs communicated to each other, or what level of social sophistication the ceratopsians maintained, is inference piled on inference. We know the brain was large relative to body. We know the eyes were positioned for binocular vision. We know the hands had mobile digits. From these anatomical facts, we infer cognitive capability. From cognitive capability, we infer behaviour. From inferred behaviour, we speculate about social structure. And from social structure, we speculate about what 66 million additional years of selection might have produced. Each step in this chain of reasoning introduces uncertainty. The final claims about what the counterfactual world's most cognitively sophisticated animals would be like are the product of many steps of inference, each one uncertain. The counterfactual world I have been describing tonight is built on the best available evidence, interpreted through the frameworks of evolutionary biology and comparative cognition, but it is built on inference, not observation. The actual animals that would have existed in that world, their specific bodies, their specific behaviors, their specific cognitive capacities, are unknowable to us. They exist only as logical possibilities that the evidence makes plausible. This is not a reason to dismiss the thought experiment. Thought experiments built on good scientific reasoning are valuable. They reveal the implications of what we know, expose the assumptions embedded in our conventional narratives, and open conceptual space for new understanding. But they require honest labeling. When I say the counterfactual world would have produced cognitively sophisticated small theropods, this is the most reasonable inference from what we know. It is not a certainty. The actual evolutionary trajectory of any lineage over 66 million years is constrained by known forces, but not determined by them. The contingencies involved are too many, and too sensitive to initial conditions, for certainty to be achievable. What I can say with confidence is this. The evolutionary forces that produced intelligence in our world, social competition, prey-predator arms races, dietary complexity, environmental variability, parental investment in offspring learning, were present and operating in the late Cretaceous world. The biological lineages best positioned to respond to those forces, the small-bodied, large-brained, dexterous social theropods, were also present. Given continued time and uninterrupted operation of those forces, some degree of cognitive expansion beyond the late Cretaceous baseline seems highly probable. How far that expansion would have gone and what form it would have taken is genuinely uncertain. The honest summary is, we don't know what the counterfactual world would have looked like. We know it would have been different. We have good reasons to believe it would have contained some remarkable cognitive complexity. We have good reasons to believe it would not have produced civilization of the kind we have. And we have good reasons to believe the question itself, how contingent is intelligence? How contingent is consciousness? How contingent are we? Is one of the most important questions available to thinking beings. The uncertainty is the point. The uncertainty is what makes the question worth asking. The editorial voice of this channel exists to do something that most documentary channels avoid, to take clear positions on contested questions, to offer genuine interpretive readings of the evidence, to say not just what happened, but what the narrator thinks it means. So here are 3 positions I hold, stated as plainly as I can manage, on the questions we have been circling throughout this documentary. The first position, the Chicxulub impactor was not a good thing. This seems obvious, but it is frequently implicit in discussions of the KPG extinction that the extinction was, in some sense, progress, the clearing of an old order to make way for something better. Dinosaurs out, mammals in, eventually humans, which is the version of the story we prefer because we are humans. This teleological reading of evolution is almost universally condemned by biologists, but almost universally present in popular discussions of the extinction. We can't quite help it. We are the product of the event, and we find it difficult to maintain genuine neutrality about events that produced us. But I think the extinction was a catastrophe, with no redemptive framing that holds up to scrutiny. 160 million years of extraordinary biological diversity, of ecosystems of astonishing complexity and antiquity, was destroyed in a geological instant. The hadrosaurs and ceratopsians and tyrannosaurs and troodontids were not waiting to be replaced by something better. They were complete organisms living full lives in complex ecological relationships. Their loss was a genuine loss, not a necessary prelude to something that mattered more. We are one possible outcome of a vast number of possible outcomes. The outcome where the asteroid missed and the dinosaurs continued would have produced something remarkable too, in its own way. The universe did not prefer our outcome. The universe does not have preferences. What happened happened, and it produced us, and we are glad to be here. But gladness is not the same as justification. The second position, intelligence, was not inevitable, even given the dinosaurs' survival. I have tried to be nuanced about this throughout, but let me be direct. The common assumption, shared by many scientists and most popular accounts, is that given enough time, some lineage will always evolve intelligence comparable to ours. The universe tends towards minds. Evolution, given sufficient time and the right starting conditions, produces intelligence reliably. I do not think this